Hello and welcome to the featured session entitled Some Thoughts on the Longevity of WAC Compared to Other Across the Curriculums. My name is Michael Todd, and I'm one of the Associate Directors for this year's AWAC conference. Before we begin, a few technical reminders. Please, during the presentations, ensure that your mics are muted, particularly because we will be recording these in speaker view. Recordings will be made available on the AWAC YouTube channel. To ask any questions, you're welcome to use the chat function below. You can insert your questions during the Q&A. I, along with the chair, are going to be paying attention to those questions as they come through. And I think that's just about everything. So I'm going to hand it over to the session chair, Dan Melzer of the University of California, Davis, to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. David Russell, an astute chronicler of the history of WAC, a skilled researcher into writing in the disciplines, and a longtime mentor to scholars and WPAs in the field of WAC, myself included. Dr. Russell is Professor Emeritus of English at Iowa State University, where he taught in the ISU-Com program, Foundation Composition and Upper Level Business and Technical Writing, and in the PhD program in Rhetoric and Professional Communication. He served as co-editor of the Advanced Communication Undergraduate Program and coordinated the internship program for the Bachelor of Science in Technical Communication. His research interests are in writing in the disciplines and professions, international writing instruction, and online multimedia case studies for computer-supported collaborative learning. His seminal book, Writing in the Academic Disciplines, A Curricular History, now in its second edition, examines the history of the United States writing instruction since 1870. He has published over 70 refereed articles on writing in the disciplines and professions, drawing mainly on cultural historical activity, theory, and rhetorical genre theory. He co-edited Landmark Essays on Writing Across the Curriculum, a special issue of Mind, Culture, and Activity on Writing Research, Writing and Learning in Cross-National Perspectives, Transitions from Secondary to Higher Education, and Writing Cells and Societies. He has given workshops and lectures on WID, including at more than 50 international meetings, and he has been keynote or featured speaker at more than 50 conferences. He has consulted with numerous institutions on writing curriculum and for international research projects sponsored by Hong Kong, German, French, British, and European Union governments. For 12 years, he edited Journal of Business and Technical Communication, a JCR-ranked journal which during his editorship had more NCTE Best Article Awards than any of its competitors, almost 1/3 of all given. He was Knight Visiting Scholar in Writing at Cornell University in 1999. I'm going to pronounce this wrong, a Leverhulme Visiting Professor at Queen Mary University of London in 2005, and a Fulbright Scholar in Portugal in 2012. Since his retirement, he continues to conduct research and participates in an AWAC-sponsored writing group. I will let Dr. Russell take it over.
Hey, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you all for coming. I have a handout posted on the platform, and I am also in the chat going to send you, I think I just did, a URL for that if that's more convenient. I'm not going to use PowerPoint, so that might help in the chronology stuff. I will pause. You're welcome to post comments in the chat during the presentation, and I'll pause a time or two during to answer some of them maybe, or take oral ones and so forth. And then I hope to have 10 or 15 minutes at the end for open discussion. As I said in the first edition of my History of WAC, published in 1992, the WAC may be the largest and longest-lived educational reform movement in the history of higher education that did not develop a formal organizational structure. Now, about 25 years later, just 3 years ago, we got a formal organizational structure, AWAC. So it no longer holds that distinction, but it is no longer purely grassroots, but it is still mainly grassroots. And I'll give some reasons here why that's a very good thing in terms of its future longevity. And then to make my argument, I'll compare WAC to several of the many other across the curriculum movements that have flourished and faded. Some of them haven't faded over the last 100 years. Not only various general education movements and other disciplines across the curriculum movements, but also faculty development movements. So it's really quite amazing to me, having been part of WAC since 1987, the first 4Cs I went to a workshop there, that it's only 3 years ago that we got a formal education, a formal organization of our own. Before the founding of AWAC, I was concerned that, as Rita Milenowitz argued about, 8 years ago, WAC might be, quote, disappearing. That's her word. And by that, she meant absorbed into the other broader general education reforms, or one of the many other reform efforts with which it's associated, like faculty development programs. So those of us involved in WAC, as you know, wear multiple hats. We're involved with writing centers, with writing programs, business and technical communication, with faculty development and improvement programs, and so forth. If you look at the program, it's very, very often WAC and writing centers, WAC and so forth. So it's possible that WAC could just kind of disappear, be absorbed into the scene as an accepted function that requires no sustaining, no special identity as a movement. But we have that now. And I want to talk about how our positionality with the hats that we wear, the different hats that we wear, works out now, and how it might work out in the future. So first, some historical comparisons. And here I'm looking at the handout, the table, and I'm starting more or less chronologically with the progressive education movement writ large, which began in the 1880s with the widespread construction of high schools in this country and colleges and universities on the land grant program, normal schools. And interestingly, the progressive education movement had a formal structure, but it lasted only 36 years, from 1919 to 1955. And its ideological opposite, you might say, the Great Books movement, began the next year with in 1920 with John Erskine's Great Books course at Columbia. But its spread was very sporadic. Today, only about 100 universities offer a Great Books course or program, even as an option. And Great Books organization is essentially a publishing operation like the Great Books Foundation. So all these reform movements that I'm going to talk about from here on out are really part of the general education movement. To spend a minute on that, the modern general education movement was founded after World War II to try to counteract authoritarian regimes and defend democracies. Does that sound familiar? That movement had the Journal of General Education, founded in 1946 by Earl McGrath, who was a driving force in the movement. But a formal organization did not happen for another 14 years, the Association for General and Liberal Studies. But it now has an annual conference, a working board, an executive director. And I now see WAC more than I did even when I the first edition of the history, as part of a kind of second generation general education reform movement that swept the US in the 1980s and 1990s, which included many other across the curriculums, diversity across curriculum, multiculturalism, ethics, global studies, and mathematics across the curriculum, philosophy, as well as reading across the curriculum, literacy across the curriculum, communication, meaning oral communication across the curriculum, technology across the curriculum, sex education across the curriculum was a thing, you know. So there were a ton of across the curriculums around this revival of interest in general education. And I'm just speculating, but I think if you look at the chronology, WAC was really the first one of those, and I think it may have influenced the others significantly. But I want to just take as an example one that's actually, I forgot to put on the handout, the critical thinking across the curriculum movement, organized in 1980. It splintered early in terms of organization. It has had an institutional presence more ephemeral than WAC. And where it is organized, it primarily sells teaching materials and training seminars. But it's still a going thing. And the Quinnipiac conference is called the Critical Thinking and Writing Conference. I think we're now, or maybe in the previous session, there was a critical thinking and WAC session here. So it's still part of the scene, but it hasn't got that purchase, that influence that WAC has had, even though everybody thinks as much as they write, even more. So it seems to me that none of the other across the curriculum themes has had the reach or staying power of WAC, maybe because writing is so very important to the work of higher education and to every profession. I mean, the world runs on writing, I like to say. Maybe it's because WAC was supported by the overall presence of writing studies, with writing centers, writing courses, writing programs, all organized nationally. Anson and Lyles did a statistical examination of writing-related articles. This is interesting. In 14 disciplinary journals that publish on pedagogy. And they found that WAC's growth coincided with and in many ways helped create and shape the professionalization of composition as a field. Yet, I think this student-facing, curriculum-focused side of WAC only partly explains its longevity. And I'll get to a deeper reason in a minute, but first I want to note that WAC also bears a close and complex relation to what has been called the faculty development movement in higher education. And this began in the 1960s. It was organized officially in 1976 as and I didn't know this until I dug into it. Some of you work in these centers for teaching excellence and so forth, but so you know about the Professional and Organizational Development Network in Higher Education, the POD. Part of the American Association of Higher Education, has its own journal, the Pod Quarterly. Interestingly, that makes it roughly the same age as WAC. It has more than 1,400 members, POD. AWAC is really too young to have developed a significant membership to compare with that, but it well might. POD, like WAC, has a significant institutional presence. In the most recent survey, 2010, about 20% of all 2-year and 4-year institutions had an active faculty development program. And WAC is, I think, at bottom, a form of faculty development, professional development. And it's not surprising that many WAC programs are housed in POD units and share personnel. In fact, one of the most important studies of faculty development was done by a team that included great WAC researchers and program developers, Bill Condon and Carol Rutz. Gosh, maybe now would be a time to just pause for breath. Let's see, I'm looking at the chat from Doug. Yes, climate change across the curriculum, that's becoming important now. Other questions in the chat or orally? Yeah. Okay. Um, a final higher education reform movement that has had a profound but I think little recognized effect on WAC, and I think affected WAC sustainability, is surprisingly enough the assessment or accountability movement that took hold with the neoliberal turn of the late 1980s. National funding for WAC dried up in the late Reagan era. WAC turned to the assessment movement as a way to leverage administrative interest in WAC and also faculty and departmental reform as an alternative to mass testing, which was the way that accountability and assessment thing was going early on. Pioneering work started in the 1990s at North Carolina State, leveraged by a new interest in assessment. The founders of that program, Chris Anson and Mike Carter, consulted widely around the country and disseminated that. And in some places, curriculum or department-based WAC found a very strong and sustainable foothold. You may recognize maybe the most successful of these, or at least most visible now, is at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, where a Ford Foundation grant allowed Pamela Flash and her team to create the Writing Enriched Curriculum, WEC. So consultants work with faculty in a department or curriculum, really. There may be more than one curriculum in a department, over a 3-year iterative cycle through recursive process of gathering data, surveys of students, faculty, alumni, employers, analytically mapping current uses of writing in each course, collaboratively planning further enhancements, implementing them and assessing them, gathering more data, and so on through another 3-year cycle. Common variation of this, also pioneered at NC State by Chris Anson, is to have a working group of faculty members who teach within a department of curriculum, carry on a multi-year research project themselves on writing in their field among their students in consultation with a writing professional. University of Central Florida is a good example of that. And more recently, Miami of Ohio, Elizabeth Wardle has improved upon this through involving departments even more fully. And in these programs, the faculty teaching a curriculum truly own writing and are responsible for it. So their values are central. And the faculty members have the expertise in writing in their discipline, and they have to define and redefine writing for themselves, curriculum, students. So full integration is the goal, learning through writing. Although writing consultants may teach mini lessons initially with faculty present, they work behind the scenes typically to consult and provide support. And in this model, faculty members teaching the curriculum are held accountable to each other, right, in the department, and to other stakeholders as well. So this concern over assessment in WAC, which is so prevalent in the 1990s, part of the larger standards and accountability push in higher education, has not been so prevalent in 21st century discussions. I'm kind of glad. One way this has played out is through alternative forms of assessment, now organized often around electronic portfolio, by documenting the value of programs through directly assessing the writing of individual students. You get to a kind of mass testing substitute, but it doesn't have to be that way entirely. There are a range of ways to go about doing a portfolio to bring in other shareholders, alumni, employers, departments, students as peers, students as tutors, and so on. And maybe because WAC programs in many places have endured the test of time, the goal is often not assessment per se, for rendering judgment on whether a program should be funded or a student should pass, but rather providing data and forums for discussing data where shareholder discussions happen, long-range improvements of programs, and that's really what assessment is about. So anyway, all of these depend on a consultancy rather than a missionary relationship with faculty in the disciplines. And I think Jeff Jablonski analyzed this in his really helpful how-to book for WAC professionals. I think Dan Meltzer's a book on assignments across the curriculum was an extraordinary contribution to this. And Sustainable WAC with a whole systems approach is the title of a fairly recent book. Sustainable WAC, a whole systems approach to launching and developing writing across curricular programs. We're to the point where we know enough about this. There have been enough experiments, successes, failures, mostly in betweens, that we can see how to move ahead. And it's great that we now have a national organizational structure to facilitate that. And I want to talk about that for a minute. To come back to my first point, while WAC is part of general education reform, part of faculty development, it's not been absorbed into either and has perhaps a larger presence than either of those, as I suggested earlier, in higher education institutions. And the fundamental reason for this, I think, is because WAC, unlike the great majority of the others, has taken seriously the profound organizing principle of higher education and of modern knowledge, which is disciplinarity, specialization. In other words, WAC has depended on WID, though that has always been a tension within the overarching WAC movement, and I think a productive tension overall. The general in general education and the universal truths or techniques of teaching are necessary to take into account, but they're rarely sufficient, at least to secure its institutional relevance and longevity. It's necessary to work with faculty on their own terms and in their own terms, and the WAC movement has continued to do that, messy as it always is. And the assessment and accountability movements allowed WAC to capitalize on the value of specialization and faculty control. So, recent developments with writing enriched curriculum variations where WAC professionals take a consulting role, ongoing iterative development by faculty in the curriculum bode well for the sustainability of WAC in the long run. And I don't think any of the other across the curriculum efforts, except perhaps mathematics, have taken disciplinary knowledge and practices as seriously and as thoroughly as WAC has. The others have remained at the level of general strategies, and I think that's limited their reach and maybe their longevity. So I'm going to look over here, take another pause, and let's see. Yeah, I'm reading Doug Hess's, says, oh, well, others here. Yeah, okay. First, Pamela, shout out. Yes, and a link there to that program. And Doug wonders if WAC gets enhanced or eroded by the emergence of teaching development, faculty development centers. He says there's an element of colonization. I sometimes speculate through a failure to recognize historical precedents and credit enterprises like WAC. Yeah. I've worked with faculty development center, CELT, Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching, it's called. And, you know, often they don't understand what we're about, and there has to be a kind of mutual education going on there. And I'm gonna come back to that. I'll never forget. I was in a meeting. We were talking about the role of writing, and I started talking about writing, and the leader of the meeting from Cell said, "Oh, let's not get into the weeds about this." And well, maybe I was in the weeds, but I think they were not weeds. They were things that could have grown. And let's see. Okay, and a different response from Jeff Galen, in that their WAC program, FAUs, is housed in a center. And so then you have to, Jeff says, negotiate within the structure of that center what the relationship is going to be and how autonomous the WAC part's going to be. Yeah, at WAC schools, that happens. At small schools, WAC becomes a de facto CTL. Yeah, if a university's got nothing going on for faculty development, WAC comes along. Hey, that's something. Administrators really like that.
David,
So
Marty Townsend also has I think a related comment.
please.
David, I wanted to comment that in the mid 1990s, I attended one of the annual national pod conferences. It was a very dreary experience. It was depressing. People were complaining at every turn. The panels were filled with unhappiness. The whole thing was very, very depressing. And I decided on the spot that I would not be affiliating with the organization or paying attention to their publications in the future. I had heard enough about them to think that I should, but when I saw them close up, it was so discouraging. Unlike, I have to say, WAC. WAC conferences have always been very lively, very friendly, the people outgoing, the ideas very stimulating, almost the direct opposite of what I found at POD.
Yeah.
I'm curious whether any of the other participants today are members of POD or have attended any of those events, and if they found the same thing that I did a long time ago. I'm going to say about 94, 95.
Would you put that in the chat? I'm going to get back to the presentation and we'll take up this theme at the end. Okay, Marty?
Sure.
Okay. As I said, the grassroots approach has limits, but it has served WAC very, very well. In fact, many people may not have noticed that over the last 50 years, WAC has had no national organization because it had other structures. The WAC movement's been very much decentralized, so change is not neatly linear, but immensely varied and dispersed. WAC has had some organizations. There was the special interest group at 3Cs, the International Network of Writing Across Curriculum Programs, founded by the wonderful Chris Thais in 1981. And NWAC, as it came to be called when it was internationalized, was only an hour and a half a year of table discussion, but a lot happened with that. Listserv, the relationship to the WAC clearinghouse at Colorado State was immensely important. That was another unofficial, more or less grassroots institution that developed. There was the biennial WAC conference, which we are at now. But notice that was, although it was very successful, attracted several hundred participants every 2 years. Over time, it changed to reflect trends in writing studies, diversity, inclusion, supporting research, and so forth. But it was just passed along informally from one university to another who wanted to do it. Quinnipiac Conference I mentioned earlier. There was the Northeast Writing Across the Curriculum Consortium, an AWAC, which was a full-fledged organization, but of course not national, regional for the Northeast. In 2012, there started to be movement, really spearheaded I have to say by Michelle Cox of Cornell and others, others at this thing. I won't try to mention them all. But there was a statement of principles hammered out, approved by 3Cs in 4Cs in 2015. In 2016, there was a survey that went out, and then feedback on bylaws. Finally, 2018, the Association for Writing Across the Curriculum, AWAC, incorporated website. And most importantly, I think, a 3-day summer professional development institute, which quickly sold out. New umbrella organization, WAC Go for graduate students. Thank you, Professor Russell. So AWAC is an important development, I think. And one of the reasons for that, to get back to Marty's comment about WAC's relationship to other organizations. First of all, within writing studies, if you noticed, the major functions of writing studies are handled by independent organizations, that is, independent of NCTE, independent of 3Cs, right? You with me? Writing centers, right, have their own national, international organization. Business communication, ABC, technical communication, right, has, oh, I'm a member, help me, teachers of technical writing, yeah, ADTW, sorry. What else? WPA, that's the big one. Okay, all of these are organized outside of NCTE 4Cs. So now WAC is as well. We have our own organization. Now let me talk about WAC in relation to the other organizations that I mentioned. You know, general education, professional development, POD, and so forth. There, the other across the curriculum themes are kind of, well, it was if we're thinking about AWAC, let's just note the committee structure of AWAC. In addition to committees for the biennial conference, our conference here, the Summer Institute, Graduate Studies, WAC Go, there are committees for advocacy, equitable working conditions for those teaching WAC courses, administrators, etc., communication, diversity and inclusion, international collaborations, all these are committees. Mentoring of WAC consultants and other stakeholders, partnerships with other writing-focused organizations, research and publication, and outreach to other parallel organizations. And in that sense, the AWAC is allowing WAC to forge official alliances. It's an official organization, so we can forge official alliances. And the responses to the other across the curriculum themes are very, very important, that we make common cause with organizations having to do with general education, diversity, multiculturalism, ethics, global studies, and so forth. And that we address the issues of nationality, race, gender, class. In fact, the very problems that inspired the formation of the general liberal education movement after World War II, the battle between democratic and authoritarian governments, between liberty and tyranny. And fortunately, AWAC has committees charged with addressing related issues, although only indirectly with the latter. And there's also the matter of research. Now AWAC can participate in discussions with for example, NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement, which provided the largest ever study of the effects of writing on student attitudes. And to Marty's comment, finally, a crucial need, I think, is that those alliances and connections with other organizations involved with educational reform accreditation, like POD, like the American Association for Higher Education, the AAHEA, the Association of American Colleges and Universities, the American Association of University Professors, AAUP, and there could be sessions on WAC at every meeting of these organizations. We could be a part of what they do and have relationships with them. And this has been true in the past. Barbara Valvord for many years. Many of you will recognize her name from her research, but she also had outstanding program development, first at Loyola, Maryland, and then at another place in Notre Dame. But I remember her saying that she felt like a voice in the wilderness when she was going, as Marty said, to POD meetings, to AEHA meetings. But now that we have this institutional presence, we may be getting a voice at the national table, at the national policy table. And in a sense, this would be back to the future, because to conclude here, it was the National Endowment for the Humanities, the NEH, that sponsored the seminars that in many ways gave birth to WAC back in the early 80s into the mid 80s. And it was Carol Schneider, a longtime president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, who organized a decade of conferences on writing and thinking in the late 80s and early 90s at the University of Chicago, featuring Wayne Booth, Joe Williams, Elaine Maiman. And teams from all over the nation attended to learn WAC principles. And there's an AWAC committee for advocacy and partnerships that can pursue this. So WAC is now more than 50 years old. And it's, I think, now prepared to take on of the next 50. I hope we never lose our grassroots enthusiasm, our grassroots networking, but I hope that we can leverage the organizational power that we have possible with the Association for Writing Across the Curriculum. So let's back to the discussion and chat. Thank you. Feel free to raise your hand, put something in the chat. Let's see. What am I missing? Oh, somebody got ATTW in there. Thank you. Oh, gosh, so much here. Let's see. I tell you what, why don't we just open it up? If you made a comment in the chat that you'd like to emphasize orally, please do. I turn it over to you, Dan, to appoint me.
Well, David, I'd be curious. Oh, Marty has a question. I'll let Marty start.
Wait, no, I simply don't want anyone to go away from this discussion thinking that I am anti-teaching and learning centers. By no means did I mean to suggest that, and I'm afraid a couple of people may have picked up that notion. I'm aware of any number of highly innovative and exciting teaching and learning centers, including at my very own campus. And our WAC program collaborates with them often and quite well. I speculate that I may simply have attended their national meeting at what may have been a low point for that organization and morale within it for whatever reason. And I'm frankly very pleased to know that others have different experiences with POD. So that's all.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Christina has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to take back up that thread that was sort of happening in the background in the chat during the talk on the kind of sometimes murky boundaries between centers for teaching and learning and WAC programs, which I brought up being at a small private institution, is particularly murky for us because we don't have a center for teaching and learning. So we have a small WAC, a small faculty development committee, part of our faculty senate. And they run a few events a year that are usually very well attended. But, I'm the first person who has any sort of role that is there simply to support faculty. And so one thing that I found has helped me to gain some traction at my institution is to approach my WAC work, because we have a brand new program. So it's a new thing for faculty, is to try to approach with a caring sort of stance in terms of caring for faculty and supporting them. I was really expecting, particularly having read stories of resistance in the literature, to get a lot of resistance. And instead, what I found was terror of, wait, how do I do this? And how can I possibly respond to all these papers when I have to mark all the commas? And what will happen if I don't mark all the commas wrong? And so I've found a lot of traction taking an approach of, I'm here to help you. That is hard. I have a person who has a degree in responding, and learning how to teach writing, and I find that hard too. And let's talk about this together. So I just think I agree that is a position of sustainability for WAC programs. And I think that's an interesting relationship that you've drawn. And, from the number of comments, it seems that it's really resonated.
And David, in the chat, Susan Miller Cochran has a follow-up to this discussion as well. And then Elizabeth Wardle has her hand up. So maybe we should also take a look at what Susan wrote, and then we'll go to Elizabeth. Does that sound okay?
Great. So Susan says to Doug, what kinds of ways can those boundaries be maintained in healthy ways? I assume you're still with the thread teaching center WAC interactions. I should let Doug talk about that, but someone mentioned budgets, and because budgets are values, that's really important to have people who know teaching as well as technology, working as instructional designers. I mean, that's just a huge, and who recognize that that writing is absolutely central to distance teaching and learning. Often the writing just disappears in the whole thing. But I'd be interested to know what others have to say on that, including Doug.
You have thoughts on that, Doug, before I ask Elizabeth her question?
I bet Liz has a better answer than me, but I think part of it is, quite frankly, a little bit of ego. I mean, those of us who have been in writing and have taught flipped classrooms for 35 years, and then to find the world discover it like Christopher Columbus, we just get annoyed, and we probably need to get over that. I do think that a lot of teaching centers, because they tend to be at larger schools fairly heavily staffed and have administrative and other kinds of resources that we don't, can push things harder and more visibly than writing programs often can. And so I think we need to be available and present and willing to do things and just get over a little bit like, oh wait, you've invented something that we've been doing a long time, and our egos are, I'll speak, my ego is insulted and I just need to get over that. But there is a strong force, and I say this as somebody who directed a teaching center, for a number of years, so I understand that. But again, I'm guessing Liz is at a better center of things, and she might have a smarter reply.
Well, I don't know. Can you hear me? I'm not used to using my earbuds. Okay. I actually only have a really minor comment about that because I want to return to a few things that David said only briefly in his talk. But I will say that given the way things are going, we need all the partners we can to leverage power to sort of fight back against the neoliberal approach to learning. And so working with our partners in CTEs, if we can, seems like a smart way to do it if we can keep ourselves from saying, we've known that for 50 years. But the question I have for you, David, is just about three things that you sort of mentioned and then you sort of slid by. You had noticed, you talked about the importance of having an influence on policy and the importance of the WAC work being done in organizations outside of 4Cs, which I thought was really interesting. And I wondered if you might have a little bit more to say there, because it does seem to me that what we do in WAC is not talk to ourselves. We're always talking to other people. And many of those people have power that we don't have. And so if we can form relationships with them, we can actually, I think, change policy in ways that we can't when we're just in 4Cs talking to ourselves. But you had sort of slid by those points, and I wondered if you had anything else you wanted to say about them.
Yeah, a lot. Let me talk about policy first. Absolutely crucial, I think, that we get us, and we don't have that now, a seat at the policy table with AAHE and these others and accreditation agencies and so forth. And I'll give you a graphic instance of the payoff of doing that, which is the committee, and I was privileged to serve on this committee with Louise Weatherby Phelps, to get recognition for our curricula into the U.S. government's accounting of majors, who's in the majors. This is fabulous. This put us officially into the map, into the list of programs. So, and that's not WAC specifically, but it's an instance of what a committee working really, really hard with a nationalist case government organization can accomplish. And somebody asked, okay, who here is a member of POD? Maybe somebody should ask that of the whole membership of AWAC. Who is a member of AAHE? Who is a member of so on and so forth and so forth? And see how we can find places where a table exists where we could get a seat at it. Second, you help me out. You talked about.
You said that it's interesting that all the WAC work's been done in these organizations that are outside of 4Cs, which I thought was a really interesting mention that maybe you had more to say about.
Yeah. 4Cs is a funny organization organizationally, and I'm not judging it for that. I'm just saying it's difficult to kind of negotiate where the work really gets done in the field, and where the leverage points are. So part of it happens, for example, in the program of the 4Cs of the conference. So you can look through it, and some years WAC is a category, sometimes WAC isn't a category. And just coming up with ways to make WAC a bigger presence, a more useful, not just big to be bigger, but a more useful presence in the Four Cs is important. And WPA has a breakfast traditionally. I mean, that's a big thing. What does WAC need at Four Cs to make go? But at a more substantial level, if you look at some of the major disciplines with a big research effort, I don't know, how many of you know that millions of dollars worth of research grants are given for writing from the National Science Foundation? Millions. Go to the NSF grant portal and type in writing, under grants. It'll take a little more work than that, but it's amazing. And who does this money go to? Well, a lot of it goes to people in the sciences, science education, who do a lot of work, research work, development work, curriculum development work on the relationship between writing and learning. So the money is going to psychologists, science ed people, and so forth. So, we could really learn from that and be a part of that. Was there another point you? No? Okay.
Yeah, I just wondered if because you sort of slipped those in and it seemed like there was a lot there to unpack, and I didn't know if you had more to say or if it was just something that was on your mind.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of opportunity out there and money out there for research in writing and things similar to writing that are going. The world runs on writing. I mean, the web runs on writing, right? So there you go. Okay, other things. I'm missing all this chat. Help me, Dan. Who's next?
Well, the chat has been continuing a little bit about WAC and teaching and learning centers. That seems to be a very hot topic.
You touched a nerve. Good.
Pamela Flash just posted about that. The idea that faculty are resistant because they think that they're not writing teachers, and kind of thinking about WAC versus CTL.
Yeah. Yeah, that's doing WAC is like teaching. I mean, you just got to keep telling the same thing, starting at the same point zero with people over and over and over again, and it's just kind of the way it is. Why can't they spell?
I guess, David, I really find this a place of productive discussion rather than, oh my God, here we go again. Why do they still think that? I moved over from a teaching and learning center environment to WAC work. And I really found that this resistance or this insistence that they were not the right people to be working with this gave me a wonderful launch pad into inductive discussion, where I could really find out what they thought writing instruction involved and what writing involved. And it gave me a lot more to unpack. So WAC gave me those opportunities in a faculty development way that I didn't have in a more general teaching and learning center.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because, and if I could ask this, because you respected their expertise, right? And you weren't teaching them.
I was curious.
Something, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and ultimately, it's really about how is change made in an environment like this. If I were to tell them how boneheaded their ideas about what writing is and isn't, it would just completely verify their presumption that I was the right person rather than them to do this. So I have found it very productive to work with that resistance.
Great. Mandy has her hand up.
Hi, I have a question. This might be a little bit more abstract, but thinking about the level of instruction that WAC work has traditionally focused on. So I've noticed in my own research and thinking about it, we're typically talking about undergraduate students writing, thinking about general education, getting through your first few years. I'm wondering in your research what you have to say about graduate level writing. What level does WAC focus on, and what are some holes that we can maybe fill there?
Well, while Michelle Cox was founding, with much help, spearheading, let me say, AWAC, she was also spearheading the Graduate Writing Center Association. And so there's now a major effort there as more and more universities get what are sometimes called graduate writing centers. And I just think that's really, really productive work. I'm glad that's organized on a national and international level. And a great deal of the research and development work worldwide is focused on what we would call graduate level here. So it's academic writing, meaning specialized kind of eventually knowledge-making work, theses, dissertations, and so forth. So that's I think that as we have more relationships with other countries and other traditions of writing research, what we call graduate writing may well become an area where we can really learn a lot and contribute. But I'd be interested to hear what others have to say about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Mandy, because I do think that there is always a default assumption that WAC is referring to undergraduate curricular reforms. And I noticed this when I came into my role and our new program was founded on my campus. The administrator, when I was being interviewed, the VPAA mentioned something offhand about, well, the graduate students should know how to write already. And I said, oh, is that so? And I tried to open up. He wasn't really interested in the conversation from writing studies about an under attention to graduate level writing instruction. But I have found that the small number of faculty who do teach graduate students on my campus, because it's sort of a slack, but we have as well an Ed.D program and one or two other specialized graduate programs, feel I have literally heard the term second-class citizen come out of their mouths in terms of how they feel attention is being paid to them at a small school where there's an overwhelming focus on undergraduate work. And they get a lot of support from the Writing Center, but the Writing Center director, who I collaborate with closely, at the same time doesn't feel comfortable advising faculty on pedagogy because she is not a faculty appointee, she's a staff appointee, and she sees her, and she also has a master's degree, and I think that could be relevant as well. And I think that she doesn't see herself as having enough authority to be able to speak to faculty without getting pushback or just without seeming like she's kind of not knowing her place in some ways. So I have found that it helps me to get traction as well for the program, build more allies across campus to proactively offer support to the graduate faculty because they are desperate for it.